Warren Doyle was probably the spearhead of it all. I have to think if he talked about it ahead of time and maybe called. He probably did, because he was extemporaneous, but he was also a planner in some ways. And I knew there was something brewing because it just travels, how the information travels on the trail. That's, I think, how I heard. There's something going on, and you're probably going to hear about it pretty soon. And before I knew it, I heard from Warren, and he had the whole thing pretty much organized, who was going to be there, what was going to happen, and it all worked out, as we know, 25 years later. I enjoyed those meetings. That was more fun. And seeing everybody again over the years, how many more trails they hiked, how many more other people they got interested in the trail, and that's all wonderful history. I remember the consternation about what to call this group, and it went back and forth and back and forth, and somebody said a hiking society, and Dave Sherman came up with the long distance hikers, and then somebody else said not 2,000 milers, you can't just make it a 2,000 mile thing. And it went back and forth a few times, and I just sat there listening to all this wonderful planning, because it was fast. Everybody had something to say, and each person listened to the other person. They weren't thinking ahead what they were going to say to counteract the last statement. And I thought, this isn't going to take long at all. And before we knew it, they had Appalachian Long Distance Hikers Association. The first gathering, I took Clara Cassidy with me. And I remember somebody saying, "You're taking who?" And I was going to drive it myself. And I said, "Clara Cassidy." "She'll fall asleep. You won't have any companionship on that long, on that long drive." And I said, "I don't think so." Well, after we came back, she hadn't taken one little nap, coming or going. I said, "I have to tell you something funny that was said about you." And when I told her, she said, "Well, now you can go back and tell that person, and you won't tell me who it was, but you tell them I didn't take one little nap." And then she must have been a little older than I, and I'm 75, so she could have earned a nap. And the others, Dave Ritchie was there, and he was on a panel, if I remember correctly. There was a panel of different people that Warren wanted to get involved so that everyone there would know where these people were coming from in the plans for the trail conference and the trail itself, of course, and how ALDHA could fit into all that. The ice cream lady was there, Sam Waddell. The South Folk Life Center was a wonderful place to start, because we were a new fledgling organization, meeting practically in the woods or out in the open. This place was a wonderful opportunity for the beginning. The way I see it, it was like a genesis. And there were a lot of people there that had good ideas, and they came out at the time. And I think some of those ideas just stayed with ALDHA all those years, because hearing them first, all these years ago, 25 years ago, and knowing that it's still the foundation of what ALDHA is, was established then. And it hasn't changed, and that's the glamour of this, if you can call it glamour. It's the wonderful thing about the organization. It just has kept Warren Doyle's initial dream and plan for such an organization has just kept it alive. And I know we understand that like minds stick together, and that's what's happened. This is a proven prophecy, if you want to call it that it has succeeded because nobody has tried to change it. At least not that I know of. I perhaps think Warren might have had some battles back and forth once in a while, but good always wins, and it did in this case. The gatherings changed over the years in numbers, attendance. It got bigger and bigger, and there were, I remember basically taking more and more things to sell since that was part of my job with ATC at the time. I was having a good time as a member of ALDHA, but I also had my job. And I sold each year, the sales increased. And I'm sure that there were a lot of hikers there who had never seen our publications till they came to the ALDHA meeting. And so ATC benefited a great deal. And membership, of course. You know, I sold memberships right and left. In fact, I don't think I let them out of the room until they signed up. The first meeting, George and I felt like we were privileged citizens. We were in a small cottage, no electricity, hardly any light. Windows were sparse, but we got a bed, and we thought, oh, this is wonderful. And we got in the bed, and we both went to the middle. But Warren did his best, and in order to take a shower, you had to have a flashlight, and there was hardly any water, but it all worked out beautifully, and we were just so pleased to be there. That was fun, and I never told him that. But there was a madhouse fire that night, a gathering around a fire, and people sang and had a ball, and I don't know how late we were there, but eventually everything died down and got into business the next day. I have some wonderful memories, and then at the school, we were always very comfortable and had plenty to eat. And you'd meet these students who would take a look at you and say, you know, where are all these people from? What do you do? And try to explain to a student who knows nothing about the Appalachian Trail what all these people are there for. And I'd say, come over to the meeting. You'd probably enjoy it, and check out the sales desk and see what we have for sale. It was wonderful watching Warren and Albie Pokrob do their seasonal, they had a name for it. They played with a frisbee, the Great Frisbee Game, or whatever, spin-off. And we all stood around and watched that until they never tired. We would just decide, well, okay, we've seen them have a good time with the frisbee. The meetings were always very, very well organized. Warren always had great entertainment. The fellow with the guitar that came from far and wide and had hiked miles and miles and miles back and forth. Walking Jim Stoltz. He was always invited to entertain us, and it was a great opportunity to just hear somebody else's experiences on trails everywhere through music, and most of it was his own compositions. And sometimes there would be, we had cloggers from the school down around that area, and boy, they had everybody clogging. I mean, they were on the stage, but afterwards we all just broke up and did our own little clogging out in the halls and so forth. And then there were hoedowns, that's what I always called them. And I remember going around and around and around Cindy Ross, and she hadn't met Todd by then, I don't think. It was a little while after that. But she was there, and Dave Ritchie. I would see hikers at ALDHA who were in between in the middle of their hike, because they'd always get off the trail to come to the meetings. And some of the stories I heard about hikers getting there, hitchhiking and riding, and down there in Virginia, when it was down at Concord College, there were a lot of farms, you know, coming and going near the trail. And they would always have hitched rides with farmers, sometimes in the back of the trucks with pigs or cows. But they'd get there, and that said a lot about these people who really wanted to say hello to all their old friends, come to the meetings to enjoy them, and maybe help someone else along the way, teaching them. And also there were those who were interested in learning from these wonderful experienced hikers. What a college that ALDHA is. It really is. It's a college. And you don't have to pay but $10 a year to go to this college. It's an instructional organization like I don't know of any other. When I retired, a year later, the ALDHA meeting was here in Pennsylvania, and not far from here. George and I went, and this was to be the goodbye to Jean kind of thing. And so we stood in the back of the auditorium watching the rest of the meeting. It was after the initial meeting. And all of a sudden, the Cavalcanti, no, the Singing Horseman. Did you know that that's what that Di Cavalcanti means? The Singing Horseman? I didn't either, but I guess it's Italian or Spanish. Anyway, he's going to hear this and he's going to say, don't you even know what nationality I am? Oh, dear. He got up and he said, okay, Jean and George, come on down front. So as I stepped out from way at the very end of the auditorium, I wasn't even sitting, we were standing there, all of a sudden Jester appears right in front of me, and he just reaches, and he's a big guy, but he reached down and scooped me up, and I weigh 100, by then I was about 140. He just picked me up, and that was a long auditorium, if I remember right. Carried me down there, and I'm at the whole time saying, put me down, I can walk, I'm not an invalid. Oh no, you're the queen, you've got to be carried down to your throne. So I ended up getting carried down anyway, and George is behind laughing and laughing. Sat down, and oh, there were all kinds of wonderful awards or presentations, and ALDHA was so kind to George and me. I should include George in more of this. My husband of 33 years now went to every ALDHA meeting, every conference meeting, and we just had the most wonderful times talking to hikers. He was always a Boy Scout master, so he knew what hiking and camping was all about. So he tremendously enjoyed meeting everybody and talking to them about the year between, what happened. Noel said, okay, now we're going to have some entertainment. And Cindy Ross and I really wish I should have called her, found out who else was in the skit. There were a bunch of people, and they were taking off on Jean sitting at the desk at ATC. And Cindy had this white mop, down over her head. I could sit here and laugh 10 minutes just remembering how she looked. And she imitated me perfectly. I said, boy, she really knows me. And George said, well, how many years have you been interacting with Cindy? And I said, yeah, a long time. But the girl is really a wonderful actress. And so they did a dance. Whoever else, there were a couple guys in with her. I'm embarrassed that I can't remember who all it was. But they did some kind of a dance. And I just had the best time that night that I'll never forget it. Something else happened years before that, but this isn't an ALDHA story, but it's a hiker's story. And it was so fun. It was at one of the ATC conferences. And Sourdough Bob and Rose was his wife's name, Rose. Her trail name had the word Rose in it because that was her name. Anyway, they did a skit at one of our conferences. And it was at the ALDHA gathering part of the conference, though. And it was all these hikers. And it was Warren Doyle and Cindy and Sourdough Bob and his wife and I don't know who, maybe 5, 6 or 7 of them. And they were hiking through a big snowstorm, and they were having trouble getting settled, and what were they going to do? They got to a shelter, and they decided they'd have to hole up for the night, and it was all very hikerish, well, I'm going to do this, and you're going to do that, and we'll make it okay. And 1 or 2 of them said, I don't think so. I think we should go back. I don't think we're going to make it. And this was at the end of their hike up in New England. And now this is a skit. All of a sudden they see remnants of a fire, a hiker's campsite. And they started to kick around it, and there was a bottle in it. And Sourdough's wife picked it up and said, there's a paper in here. Cindy took it, and she took the paper out, and it said, don't stop now, keep on going, love, Jean. That was my job. keeping on, and they had it down pretty solid. They knew that they couldn't give up, and I'll never forget that. That was a wonderful memory. I think they wanted to give the people in the northern part of the trail an opportunity to get to the meetings if they couldn't get all the way down to West Virginia. And so Hanover was a perfect spot. That again worked out beautifully for Warren, and the spaces they gave us to set up our sales desk, and all the people coming in were right there at the entrance of the, forget what building it was, but they could set up the registration desks, and everything worked out so beautifully. And I remember one year it was warm enough that we could be outside, and there was a glen somewhere not too far away, and we could set up there right in the middle of these big rocks, trees, and the weather was gorgeous, and we were there the whole time. If I remember correctly, we didn't ever have to close up, over the couple days. That I recall was wonderful. Woodchuck, yeah, he was always so boisterous and energetic, and he would pick me up some of the time. He'd just say, "Here she is," and set me down again, and catch me up with what was going on. And I was very fond of his mother and father too. I don't know if you know it, if whoever's watching this knows it, but Chuck Wood Sr. was a carpenter, and he made birdhouses for anybody and everybody, and he always put a little plaque on them, the number, or not a plaque, but the number of the birdhouse, which was consecutive to as he was making them. And he and Chuck and Chuck's mother came to visit us when we lived on the river, and brought us birdhouses and beautiful wall sconces that he had made out of old barn doors. He used the old barn door wood, and Chuck was just so happy to be there and looking at the trees out in the yard, where they were going to put them. This was when we lived near Harpers Ferry. And I remember George hanging them up, and there were always birds in them, and he did them with the idea of smaller holes for wrens, and then there were bluebird houses, and if we wanted a duck house, he would even do that. Well, now we need it out on the pond, but he's not around anymore. Chuck Wood is, though, and he made us, for every anniversary, every grandchild that was born, he made us a birdhouse, and I have them all here. And they all have plaques on them with his inscription and which numbers they were, and I think we were up to over 500 and something by the time, yeah, you can see them before you leave if you want to. And that was Woodchuck, and he was always at those meetings and always had something wonderful to say. And Raven, there's only one Raven, and we haven't heard from him lately, and so I need to call him, because he always visited us when we lived near Harpers Ferry, and he taught me how to take pictures of birds going into Chuck Wood's birdhouses. And I remember sitting, and I'm thinking, Raven, you're here for a visit. Do you really want to do this? Just wait. And then all of a sudden, the right bird would come, and we'd get the picture. And after he'd send me the pictures, he'd say on the back, "Now, wasn't this worth waiting for?" And he sang beautifully. And so did his wife. His wife and he hiked the whole trail together. And I'm not sure what year that was, but she passed on a little later, and he kept hiking in many areas. He's from Michigan, so he hiked in Canada, and he would send us or bring us photographs of birds in those areas, because I love birds. Well, when he and his wife came through Harpers Ferry on his through hike, he walked in the door. I had never met the man. I had sent him information, talked to him on the phone, but he walked in the door tall, like Lincoln, with his beautiful gray beard. He sat down at the chair in front of my desk, and he leaned on my desk, and he said, are you ready for this? I said, oh, I'm ready for anything. I never know what's going to happen at the front desk. And he started to sing his Appalachian Trail song. Every state he went through, he had a rhyme or a melody and the lyrics for the state. And it was the AT through Georgia all the way up to Harpers Ferry. And then when he got to Harpers Ferry, of course, that was the end of the song for that moment. But he said, and when I'm finished, I will call you and I'll sing you the rest of the song. I said, okay. We're talking about 3 months later, maybe 2 months. Sure enough, he got to Maine. He finished the song, and I had my, the phone at my ear at work. I'm listening to this song. Finally, I just said to everybody, get out of the way. I just want to hear this song. And he sang the whole thing all the way to Maine. And then I heard it again at the next ALDHA meeting. He sang it, and many more, I'm sure, but I didn't always get to that part of the entertainment. If he did it during the afternoon, I was always at the sales desk. But he's a wonderful man. He just is so enthusiastic. And I remember at the ALDHA meeting when they had a contest, or he started the contest somehow, and everybody was to bring apples from their state. And of course, Michigan, according to him, has the best apples. He won the first year. I don't know about the years after that, but they're still doing it. I'm a life member of ALDHA. Thank you, ALDHA. That was a wonderful gift. I wish I knew what year this was. It was maybe the second year or third year when they started to give life memberships to ALDHA. And I was maybe the first, and then Sam was the second, and Bonnie was the third, somewhere in that category. Now they alphabetize them all because there's a lot of them. And I remember being so shocked. I just stood there. I had no clue that they were even thinking about this because they were still a young organization. But that's the nature of ALDHA. Give the reward now and we'll get it paid for as time goes on, whatever works out. And it has worked out. It's just, I'm just as happy with that membership as I am with ATC's. That was another life membership, but ALDHA's was from the heart. Yeah. And I'm going to cry again if we're not careful here. Somebody I forgot to talk about was Ed Garvey. He was a wonderful inspiration for me when I first started to work at ATC. And many times I would call him. I only hiked as a college student. I didn't know a whole lot about the trail myself. And when I was offered the job, that was what I said to Colonel Holmes, who's the first director, who hired me. I said, I only have the experience on the trail in Pennsylvania. What am I going to do when people call me about all these other states? And there's all these guidebooks I never even saw a guidebook before. I went with a college group. And so I had to learn an awful lot. And I would call Ed Garvey every now and then and say, hey, Ed, you've done the whole trail. I need to know this and that and the other thing. And he was on the board of managers. And then I wasn't even aware of what the board of managers was up to that point because they met only once a year. Once a year? Well, anyway, Garvey made me feel so comfortable calling him and saying, I have a question here and I don't want to send these people off on the wrong trail or wrong track or whatever. And he would always sometimes he would come up to ATC and talk to me about it. And then when I'd see him at ALDHA, we'd sit down and he'd always say, now, what do you want to know? Well, this was like 15 years later, and I didn't want to hurt his feelings and say, well, I pretty much know those books upside down, inside out, and backwards, but I'm sure there's something I can think of to ask you here. But he was so gracious, and he was a real foundation member of ALDHA. He had a lot to say in the very beginning, and people listened to him. They were always interested. And Thurston Griggs is another fellow. Maybe a lot of people hearing this won't know who I'm talking about, but he was from Baltimore, and he was a retired teacher, professor, played the cello in the Baltimore Symphony. He was the ridge runner for Maryland for 10 years at least. He was another one that was very, very interested in what ALDHA was doing. I don't know that he ever got involved, but he'd always ask me, how was the meeting and What did you learn that we can benefit from? Everybody respected ALDHA. They might not have been interested enough to join and come along, but they all had great respect for these people who loved the AT and who were proving it by helping. And I'm sort of coming into what I feel ALDHA really is and how it has evolved over these years. It's a diamond always in the rough, which means it's always changing. It's always getting polished. But there'll always be those rough spots that make it what it is. Down home is all the two words that make me think about, that remind me of ALDHA. When you talk about down home things, ALDHA's down home. It's earthy. It's inclusive. And when you're in an organization that's inclusive, you feel loved, you feel supported, which of course support is part of love, but it's a feeling that people can take with them from the meeting, which will last them till the next meeting. And even after the meetings are over, they will always have this wonderful, supportive group of people who started out with that foundation, with that, what's the word here? Principle. It's a law of ALDHA that you love one another, you love the trail, you love to volunteer. What more does the world need than a group like that? That's my ALDHA. One thing that impressed me about Warren, when he wasn't on the trail and in the office talking about the trail and information for his groups that he took out, I'll never forget this as long as I live. He came in the office with the group, and we had planned ahead of time to sit in the back of the visitor center there at ATC and just kick back and talk about what these people should expect on the trail. A real crossroads, or a real variety of ages too. I think the youngest was maybe a teenager and the oldest was retired. And so I had to briefly kind of give them the AT's outlook on what they were about to do, and that we were there to support them. Well, we did that a number of times, Warren and his group and me, or I. And this one time, and I don't know, well, I think it's almost a religious experience. We sat down and Warren started to ask me a question and I'd answer, and then of course one thing would lead to another and someone else would ask a question and I would answer. And then I would get off on my own little tangent about this wonderful opportunity and what it would mean to them way down the pike. There was something clicked that day that I've never had happen before or again that was just almost reverential. It was like God was sitting back there listening to this group and blessing them. It was very hard to describe, but afterwards Warren looked at me and I looked at him. Neither one of us said what we were thinking, but we just smiled at each other like we got it right.